The storm hit without warning. Captain Elias Voss gripped the controls of his small exploration vessel, sweat trickling down his forehead as alarms blared all around him. Outside the cockpit window, the sky churned with violent streaks of purple lightning, illuminating an alien planet below, a swirling mass of green forests and shimmering rivers that seemed to glow faintly under the dim light of two suns. "Come on, hold together," Elias muttered through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of warning sirens. He had been sent on a routine survey mission by Earth's Interstellar Exploration Corps, tasked with mapping uncharted regions of space. But now, his ship was failing him in the worst possible way. A rogue asteroid had clipped one of the engines hours earlier, leaving him stranded in orbit around this mysterious world. With no other options left, he made the decision to attempt an emergency landing. The descent was anything but smooth. The ship shuddered violently as it pierced through the thick atmosphere, flames licking at its hull like hungry predators. Trees blurred past the windows as gravity pulled him closer to the ground. Elias clenched the yoke tightly, fighting to keep the craft level despite the turbulence. His training kicked in. He focused on finding a clearing amidst the dense forest canopy below. Finally, with a deafening crash, the ship skidded across soft, mossy terrain before coming to a halt against a cluster of glowing crystalline trees. For several moments, there was only silence. Smoke filled the cabin, stinging his eyes and making it hard to breathe. Coughing, Elias unbuckled himself from the pilot's seat and stumbled toward the exit hatch. His body ached from the impact, but adrenaline kept him moving. Pushing open the damaged door, he stepped outside into the strange new world. The air smelled sweet, almost floral, and carried a faint hum that resonated deep within his chest. All around him stretched a forest unlike anything he'd ever seen. Bioluminescent plants cast a soft glow, painting the landscape in hues of blue, green, and gold. Strange creatures flitted between the branches above, their wings sparkling like tiny prisms catching the sunlight. It was breathtakingly beautiful and completely alien. Elias took a cautious step forward, wincing as pain shot through his ankle. He glanced back at the wreckage behind him. Smoke still curled lazily into the sky. There was no way he could repair the ship alone. Not here, not without tools or supplies. His scanner buzzed faintly in his pocket, reminding him of its presence. Pulling it out, he activated the device, hoping for some sign of civilization nearby. To his relief, the screen flickered to life, displaying faint energy signatures emanating from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Well," he said aloud, more to steady his nerves than anything else, "looks like I'm walking." As he limped forward, guided by the scanner's readings, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Every rustle of leaves, every distant chirp, set his heart racing. This place felt alive, not just with wildlife, but with something sentient. Somewhere ahead, perhaps hidden among those glowing trees, intelligent beings might already know he was here. Whether they would welcome him or see him as a threat remained to be seen. One thing was certain: whatever awaited him beyond the forest, his life would never be the same again. The forest grew denser as Elias pressed onward, his scanner leading him toward the faint energy signature. Each step was cautious, his injured ankle throbbing with every movement. The glowing plants cast eerie shadows on the ground, and the hum in the air seemed to grow louder, almost like a melody he couldn't quite place. Despite the beauty of his surroundings, unease lingered in the pit of his stomach. He was an outsider here, a stranger in a world that felt both enchanting and alien. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, revealing a clearing bathed in soft golden light. At its center stood a structure unlike anything Elias had ever seen, a crystalline palace that shimmered as if it were alive. Its walls refracted the sunlight into dazzling rainbows, and delicate spires reached skyward, blending seamlessly with the natural landscape. It looked less like a building and more like a living organism grown from the earth itself. Elias hesitated at the edge of the clearing, unsure whether to approach. But curiosity got the better of him. Taking a deep breath, he limped closer, his boots crunching softly against the mossy ground. There were no guards, no visible defenses, just an open doorway framed by translucent arches that pulsed faintly with light. Gathering his courage, he stepped inside. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. The walls glowed faintly, casting a warm, inviting light throughout the chamber. Intricate patterns danced across the surfaces, shifting and flowing like liquid. In the center of the room stood a figure who took Elias's breath away. She was tall and slender, her skin a pearlescent silver that caught the light in mesmerizing ways. Her long, flowing hair shimmered like starlight, cascading down her back in waves. But what struck Elias most was that she wore nothing. Not a stitch of clothing, not even jewelry. Instead, intricate designs of glowing light adorned her body, swirling and shifting like constellations mapped onto her skin. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, realizing she wasn't alone, the woman turned sharply, her wide eyes locking onto Elias. Her expression shifted instantly from calm serenity to sheer shock. She raised her hands instinctively, summoning shimmering veils of energy that wrapped around her form, obscuring her nudity. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Elias froze, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. Dirty, disheveled, and armed with nothing but a handheld scanner. He stammered, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. I didn't mean to intrude. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She took a cautious step forward, then stopped, her glowing veils flickering uncertainly. Though they couldn't understand each other's words, their body language spoke volumes. Elias lowered his scanner slowly, placing it on the ground to show he meant no harm. The woman watched his movements carefully, her posture tense but not hostile. A tense silence hung between them, broken only by the faint hum of the chamber. Finally, the woman extended one hand cautiously, palm facing upward. Elias hesitated for a moment before mirroring the gesture, his own palm meeting hers in midair. As their hands touched, a strange sensation washed over him, a rush of emotions so vivid it nearly knocked him off balance. Fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite name flooded his mind, as if he were experiencing her feelings firsthand. Startled, Elias pulled his hand back, his heart racing. The woman did the same, her glowing eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, both trying to process what had just happened. Whatever this connection was, it was clear that their encounter was far from ordinary, and far from over. The strange sensation lingered in Elias's mind long after their hands had parted. He stood frozen, unsure how to react or what to say. The alien woman before him seemed equally unsettled, her glowing veils flickering faintly as though mirroring her unease. Her wide eyes studied him intently, searching for answers neither of them could yet provide. Elias took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Okay," he murmured under his breath, more to calm his racing thoughts than anything else. "Let's try this again." Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands, palms open and facing outward, a gesture he hoped would convey peace. Then, with exaggerated care, he pointed to himself and said, "Elias." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression softening just a fraction. She hesitated for a moment before mimicking his actions, pointing to herself and speaking the single word that sounded like liquid music, "Syra." "Syra," Elias repeated, nodding slowly. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a fragile thread connecting two vastly different beings. Encouraged by her response, Elias tried something else. He pointed to the glowing patterns on Syra's skin, then gestured toward the shimmering walls around them. Syra watched him closely, her brow furrowing in thought. After a moment, she stepped forward cautiously and touched one of the crystalline panels. Instantly, the patterns on the wall shifted, responding to her touch like ripples in water. She turned back to Elias, motioning between the wall and her own glowing designs, as if explaining they were connected somehow. Though he didn't fully understand, Elias nodded again, hoping to show he was paying attention. Determined to keep the momentum going, he tapped his chest twice, then pointed to his head, attempting to mine the idea of thinking or feeling. Sayra's eyes lit up with recognition, or perhaps understanding, and she reached out hesitantly, brushing her fingertips against his arm. The moment their skin made contact, another wave of emotions surged through Elias. This time, however, it felt less overwhelming and more intentional. He sensed curiosity, caution, and even a hint of amusement from Sayra, as though she found his clumsy attempts at communication endearing. When he looked into her luminous eyes, he saw something new there, trust beginning to take root. Inspired by their progress, Elias decided to test another theory. He crouched down and traced a simple shape in the smooth floor, a circle. Sayra leaned forward, intrigued, before kneeling beside him. With graceful movements, she added lines within the circle, turning it into a sun-like symbol. Elias grinned, recognizing it as a representation of the twin suns he'd seen earlier in the sky. They continued trading symbols, each addition building upon the last until they had created a rudimentary map of the surrounding area. As they worked together, the tension between them began to dissolve. Sayra's glowing veils relaxed, becoming softer and less opaque, while her posture grew more open and inviting. For his part, Elias felt a growing sense of wonder, not just at Sayra's intelligence and creativity, but at the sheer possibility of connection across such an immense divide. By the time they finished their impromptu art project, hours had passed without either of them noticing. Exhausted but exhilarated, Elias sat back on his heels, meeting Sayra's gaze with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Though they still couldn't speak each other's languages, they had found a way to bridge the gap between them, one gesture, one shared emotion, at a time. For the first time since crashing on this alien planet, Elias allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone anymore. As the hours turned into what Elias guessed was evening, judging by the dimming light filtering through the crystalline walls, he and Silrek continued their silent exchange of ideas. Though they still lacked a common language, their growing bond allowed them to communicate in ways that transcended words. Every gesture, every shared emotion, brought them closer to understanding each other's worlds. Sensing his curiosity, Sayra led Elias deeper into the palace, her glowing veils trailing softly behind her like ethereal wings. They passed through corridors adorned with intricate carvings that seemed alive, shifting and shimmering, as though telling stories only her people could read. Finally, they entered a large chamber filled with floating orbs of light suspended at varying heights. Each orb pulsed gently, casting colorful reflections across the room. Sayra approached one of the orbs and touched it lightly. Instantly, an image materialized in the air, a holographic depiction of her world. Rolling hills dotted with bioluminescent forests stretched out beneath twin suns, while rivers of liquid crystal wound their way through the landscape. Tiny figures moved among the trees, tending to plants and animals in perfect harmony with nature. Elias watched in awe, captivated by the beauty and simplicity of their way of life. Turning to him, Sayra pointed to herself, then gestured toward the scene before mimicking the act of planting seeds in the ground. Elias nodded slowly, piecing together the message. Her people lived in balance with their environment, relying on sustainable practices to thrive. It was a stark contrast to humanity's often destructive tendencies, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for the state of his own planet. Encouraged by his reaction, Sayra moved to another orb and activated it. This time, the hologram showed her standing alone in the forest, her body glowing brightly without any veils covering her form. She paused, then motioned to Elias and raised an eyebrow questioningly. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. To clarify, she stepped closer and touched his arm again, sending another wave of emotions through him. This time, feelings of openness and vulnerability. Elias finally understood. For Cyrus people, nudity wasn't about shame or exposure. It represented honesty and connection. By revealing themselves fully, they demonstrated trust and transparency. The glowing patterns on their skin weren't just decorative. They were expressions of identity, culture, and even emotion, constantly changing based on their inner states. Realizing this, Elias felt a newfound respect for Syra and her society. He glanced down at his own clothes, stained, torn, and practical, and wondered if she saw them as barriers rather than protection. Tentatively, he reached up and loosened the collar of his shirt, letting cool air brush against his skin. Syra noticed the gesture and smiled faintly, her glowing designs brightening in approval. To further explain her culture, Syra guided Elias to yet another orb. When activated, it displayed scenes of her people harnessing energy from natural sources, sunlight captured by massive crystalline arrays, geothermal vents powering entire cities, and wind turbines integrated seamlessly into the landscape. Their technology was advanced but unobtrusive, designed to enhance, not dominate, their surroundings. Elias marveled at the ingenuity of it all. Back on Earth, progress often came at the expense of the environment. But here, innovation and sustainability went hand in hand. He realized that Cyrus people had achieved something remarkable, a civilization where science and nature coexisted in perfect harmony. By the time they left the chamber, night had fallen outside the palace. The forest beyond the windows glowed softly, its light reflecting off Syra's radiant form. As they walked side by side, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was learning far more than just the customs of an alien race. He was discovering a new way of seeing the universe, one rooted in empathy, balance, and hope. For the first time in his life, Elias began to imagine a future where humanity might follow their example, and perhaps with Syra's help, he could be the bridge that made it possible. The peaceful rhythm of the alien palace was shattered without warning. A deep, resonant hum reverberated through the crystalline walls, followed by a series of sharp, piercing alarms that echoed like thunder. Syra's glowing patterns flared brightly, shifting to shades of crimson and gold, an unmistakable sign of distress. She turned sharply toward Elias, her expression tense but resolute. "Krill," she said firmly, pointing upward. Though he didn't understand the word, the urgency in her tone left no room for doubt. Something was wrong. Elias followed her gaze instinctively, his heart pounding as he looked out through the translucent dome above them. In the distance, dark shapes moved against the starlit sky, ships, sleek and menacing, descending rapidly toward the planet's surface. Their metallic hulls gleamed coldly, a stark contrast to the warm, organic glow of Syra's world. They were clearly not here for friendly purposes. Syra grabbed Elias's arm, pulling him toward a nearby console. Her hands moved swiftly over its surface, and holographic displays sprang to life, showing detailed scans of the approaching fleet. The ships were heavily armed, their weapon systems already powering up. Whatever these intruders wanted, they weren't planning to ask nicely. Elias felt a surge of panic. "What do we do?" he asked, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. But his question seemed to resonate regardless. Syra placed a hand on his shoulder, her glowing designs calming slightly as if to reassure him. Then, with quick, deliberate motions, she began explaining their situation using gestures and shared emotions. Through their connection, Elias sensed fear, but also determination. Syra's people had faced this threat before. These invaders, whoever they were, sought to conquer and exploit, driven by greed rather than harmony. And now, they had returned. Syra led Elias to another chamber, this one filled with shimmering panels and intricate machinery. It was clear she needed his help, though he wasn't sure how much use he'd be. Still, he couldn't stand idly by while she prepared to defend her home. Determined to contribute, he studied the equipment around him, searching for anything familiar. His eyes landed on a control panel marked with symbols that vaguely resembled Earth's technical interfaces. "Let me try," he muttered, stepping forward. Using his knowledge of human engineering, Elias began tinkering with the system. He rerouted power flows, adjusted frequencies, and programmed decoy signals designed to confuse the enemy sensors. Syra watched intently, occasionally offering guidance through touch or gesture. Together, they transformed the palace's defensive grid into a web of misdirection and traps. Meanwhile, Syra rallied her people. Through a network of glowing orbs scattered throughout the forest, she broadcast messages urging everyone to prepare. Elias caught glimpses of her citizens gathering outside the palace, their glowing forms blending seamlessly with the bioluminescent landscape. They worked together with quiet efficiency, setting up barriers of energy and planting devices that pulsed faintly, ready to disrupt the invaders' systems. As the first of the enemy ships entered the atmosphere, Elias felt a mix of dread and resolve. This was no longer just Syra's fight. It was his too. Despite the overwhelming odds, he found himself inspired by the unity and courage of her people. They'd fought not out of hatred, but to protect what they loved. When the ground trembled beneath the impact of the first landing craft, Syra turned to Elias one last time. Her glowing patterns shifted to a soft, steady blue, a color he now recognized as trust. She touched his arm gently, conveying gratitude and determination in equal measure. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The battle began with a deafening roar as the first wave of enemy ships unleashed their weapons, raining fire upon the glowing forest. Trees shattered into shards of light, and the air crackled with energy. Syra's people stood firm, their collective resolve unwavering despite the chaos erupting around them. Elias watched in awe and fear as they channeled their psychic abilities, forming a shimmering shield that stretched across the landscape. The barrier pulsed faintly, absorbing the brunt of the attack and protecting the palace. But Elias knew the shield wouldn't hold forever. The invaders, whom he now understood were called the Krill, were relentless, their technology advanced and brutal. He glanced at Syra, who was coordinating her people with calm precision. Her glowing patterns shifted rapidly, communicating strategies through colors and movements only her kind could interpret. Yet even she couldn't hide the strain etched on her face. "We need more time," Elias muttered to himself, scanning the battlefield for anything he could use to turn the tide. His eyes landed on an abandoned mining drone parked near the edge of the clearing. It was old and rusted, but its core systems still functioned, a relic left behind by earlier explorers. An idea sparked in his mind. "Syra," he called out, pointing toward the drone. When she turned to him, he mimed piloting motions, then pointed at the enemy ships. Understanding dawned in her eyes, and she nodded sharply, signaling her approval. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Elias sprinted toward the drone, dodging bursts of energy from the sky. The controls were simple enough. Within minutes, he had reprogrammed the machine to act as a makeshift weapon. Using his scanner, he identified weak points in the Krill fleet's formation and programmed the drone to target them specifically. As it lifted off the ground, humming with newfound purpose, Elias felt a flicker of hope. Back at the palace, Syra rallied her citizens once more. She raised her hands high, and the crowd mirrored her gesture, their glowing forms sensing together like a single organism. A wave of psychic energy surged outward, striking one of the larger Krill ships and disabling its engines. The vessel plummeted to the ground, crashing harmlessly into a nearby river of liquid crystal. Cheers erupted among Syra's people, their unity strengthening with every success. Meanwhile, Elias guided the drone toward the heart of the enemy fleet. Its small size made it difficult to detect, allowing it to slip past the Krill's defenses unnoticed. Once in position, Elias activated its payload, a concentrated burst of electromagnetic energy designed to disrupt their systems. The drone exploded in a brilliant flash of light, taking out several smaller ships and crippling the flagship's command center. The Krill responded with fury, intensifying their assault. One of their blasts struck dangerously close to Elias, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before he could recover, Syra appeared at his side, pulling him to his feet. Her glowing designs flared brightly, conveying both concern and gratitude. Together, they retreated back to the safety of the palace, where the shield still held strong, but barely. As the battle raged on, Elias realized something crucial. The Krill weren't just fighting to conquer. They were desperate. Their resources must be dwindling, forcing them to invade peaceful worlds like Cyrus. This revelation gave him an idea. If they could make the invasion too costly, perhaps the Krill would retreat. Elias relayed his plan to Syra through gestures and shared emotions. With her guidance, they coordinated one final daring maneuver. Syra's people focused all their psychic energy on creating a massive feedback loop, amplifying the shield's power until it became unstable. At the same time, Elias used the remaining drones to lure the Krill ships into a narrow canyon lined with volatile crystals. When the trap was set, Syra released the shield's energy in a controlled burst, triggering a chain reaction that sent shockwaves rippling through the valley. One by one, the Krill ships faltered, their systems overloaded by the combined assault. Realizing they were outmatched, the surviving vessels disengaged, retreating into the sky. Cheers erupted among Syra's people as the threat finally subsided. Exhausted but triumphant, Elias looked at Syra, who smiled softly, her glowing patterns returning to their serene blue. They had done it. Together. The aftermath of the battle was a surreal mix of relief and exhaustion. Smoke hung in the air, mingling with the faint glow of shattered crystals scattered across the forest floor. The once pristine landscape bore scars from the Krill's attack, but the palace still stood, a testament to the resilience of Syra's people. Elias leaned against a damaged wall, his body aching from the strain of the fight. Yet his mind raced with the enormity of what they had just accomplished. Syra approached him, her glowing patterns dimmed but steady, like embers after a fire. She placed a hand on his shoulder, sending a wave of gratitude through their connection. Though no words were spoken, Elias understood her message clearly. Thank you. He nodded, offering a weary smile in return. For all their differences, they had become an unlikely team, united by necessity and trust. But the victory wasn't without cost. As Elias surveyed the scene, he noticed groups of Syra's people tending to the wounded and repairing the damage. Some knelt beside fallen comrades, their glowing forms flickering weakly as if mirroring their grief. It was a sobering reminder that even in a society built on harmony, conflict came at a price. Syra seemed to sense his somber thoughts. She took his hand gently and led him to a quiet corner of the palace, away from the bustle of recovery efforts. There, she activated a holographic display showing the extent of the destruction caused by the Krill, not just on this day, but over years of repeated invasions. Entire regions of her world had been stripped bare, their natural resources plundered to fuel the invaders' war machines. Elias felt a pang of anger and guilt. Humanity had its own history of exploitation. How different were they, really, from the Krill? Determined to make amends, Elias turned to Syra. We can't let them come back, he said firmly, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping his tone conveyed his resolve. Through gestures and shared emotions, he outlined a plan. Fortify the planet's defenses using a combination of her people's psychic abilities and his knowledge of human engineering. Together, they could create a system capable of deterring future attacks. Syra listened intently, her glowing designs shifting thoughtfully. When Elias finished, she nodded and touched her chest, then pointed to him. The message was clear. Together. Over the next several days, Elias worked tirelessly alongside Syra's people. They repurposed abandoned technology, reinforced energy shields, and developed early warning systems to detect approaching threats. Elias marveled at how seamlessly their skills complemented each other, his practical ingenuity blending with their intuitive understanding of energy and nature. Slowly but surely, the planet began to heal, both physically and emotionally. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in hues of amber and violet, Syra joined Elias on a balcony overlooking the repaired landscape. She gestured toward the stars, her expression thoughtful. Through their bond, Elias sensed her unspoken question. Asterisk, what happens now? Asterisk. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. His mission had been simple, to explore and report, but everything had changed since his crash landing. This world, these people, had become more than just subjects of study. They were friends, allies, and perhaps something more. Staring into Syra's luminous eyes, Elias realized he couldn't leave. Not yet. There was still so much work to be done, so many lessons to learn. As if reading his thoughts, Syra smiled softly and placed a hand over his heart. Her glowing patterns brightened briefly, filling him with warmth and reassurance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as partners, as equals, and as symbols of hope for a brighter future. In that moment, under the vast alien sky, Elias felt a profound sense of belonging. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to be part of something greater than himself. Weeks passed, and the planet began to heal. The scars left by the Krill's invasion slowly faded as Syra's people worked tirelessly to restore their world. Trees regrew, their bioluminescent leaves glowing brighter than ever, as if determined to reclaim the light stolen during the battle. Rivers of liquid crystal flowed freely once more, nourishing the land with their shimmering energy. The harmony that defined their society was returning, stronger and more resilient than before. Elias found himself deeply embedded in this new rhythm of life. Each day brought fresh challenges and opportunities to contribute, whether it was helping repair damaged structures or teaching Syra's engineers about Earth's technology. In return, he learned invaluable lessons from her people, how to live sustainably, how to harness natural energy without harming the environment, and most importantly, how to connect with others on a deeper, empathetic level. Syra remained at his side throughout, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Though they still couldn't speak the same language, their connection transcended words. Through shared emotions, gestures, and moments of quiet understanding, they communicated in ways that felt richer and more meaningful than any spoken dialogue. Elias often caught himself marveling at her wisdom, her grace, and the way she carried herself with quiet strength. She had become not just his guide, but also his closest friend, and perhaps something even more. One evening, as they stood together beneath the twin suns, Syra handed Elias a small crystalline device. It pulsed faintly with light, its surface etched with intricate patterns resembling those on her skin. When Elias looked at her questioningly, she touched his chest gently, then pointed toward the stars. Through their bond, he understood. Asterisk used this to share our story. Asterisk. The device was a communication beacon, capable of transmitting messages across vast distances of space. With it, Elias could send a report back to Earth, not just about the planet's resources or technological advancements, but about its people, their culture, and the lessons they had to offer. He realized this wasn't just an opportunity to fulfill his mission. It was a chance to inspire change. That night, Elias sat alone in the palace's observatory, crafting his message. He described the beauty of Syra's world, the ingenuity of her people, and the values that guided their lives: balance, empathy, and unity. He wrote of their struggle against the Krill and how they had triumphed not through violence, but through cooperation and resilience. And finally, he included a personal plea. Asterisk, we have much to learn from them. Let this be a reminder that humanity's future depends not on conquest, but on coexistence. Asterisk. When the message was complete, Elias activated the beacon, watching as its light shot skyward, disappearing into the endless expanse of stars. For a moment, he felt a pang of uncertainty. Would anyone listen? Would Earth heed his call for change? But then he remembered Syra's unwavering optimism and drew strength from it. Even if progress took time, the seed had been planted. In the days that followed, Elias made a decision. He wouldn't leave. Not yet. There was still so much to learn, so many ways he could help. Syra welcomed his choice with a radiant smile, her glowing patterns shifting to hues of joy and gratitude. Together, they continued working toward a brighter future, for her people, for humanity, and for all who sought peace among the stars. As the forest glowed softly under the twin suns, Elias gazed upward, feeling a profound sense of hope. Somewhere out there, his message traveled, carrying the promise of a better tomorrow. And here, on this alien world, he had found a home, a place where differences didn't divide, but united. For the first time in his life, Elias truly believed in the possibility of harmony, not just between worlds, but within himself.